Chapter 11. Highest scores and internship invitations. Isn't that Sway? Wasn't he near the bottom of the rankings last semester? With the standards this strict, he's bound to fail. As Sway made his way to the front, few of the students paid him any attention. In their minds, he was simply another inevitable failure. What dish are you presenting? Just then, Yuzuki approached Sway, her expression unreadable. Huh. The class president seems to be paying a lot of attention to him. Yeah, it's odd. The surrounding students were surprised to see this interaction. Yuzuki was their idol. Why was she suddenly interested in someone like Sway, who was barely noticeable in class? It didn't make any sense to them. Big fried rice with pork, Sway answered plainly. Yuzuki gave a slight nod before walking away. The class president seems to care about you, Luna commented, a curious tone in her voice. Sway shrugged. He found Yuzuki's attention towards him equally puzzling, but he didn't dwell on it. It wasn't worth thinking about. Meanwhile, manager Mita, having tasted several mediocre dishes, was in a better mood. He had just sampled a few decent meals that finally broke the streak of disappointments. Yuzuki, who he had known since junior high, had consistently shown promise, and it was clear her skills had advanced even further. In a few short days, Mita felt confident that she could transition into a full-fledged chef. Her talent was well known. Signing a contract with Kagura Sakaya, a prestigious restaurant, while still in school was a rare honor. Luna also displayed significant potential. Mita suspected that she, too, might receive an internship offer upon graduation. At that moment, Sway stepped up and placed his dish in front of manager Mita. Sinengig fried rice with pork. Please give it a taste. All right, Mita responded, coming back to his senses as he picked up his chopsticks, preparing to evaluate Sway's offering. Sway was nervous. This Sinengig fried rice was his best dish, refined through practice, but would it meet the high standards set by the manager? The system had given it a passing grade, but Mita was known to be far more critical. As soon as Sway lifted the bowl covering the plate, a cloud of steam rose, carrying with it the enticing aroma of freshly fried rice. The golden grains of rice gleamed, dotted with vibrant green peas, tender yellow corn, and bright red ham. And with the eye-catching sizzling pork adorned on top of it, the sight alone was enough to whet anyone's appetite. This dish. Mita thought, taken aback. The presentation was leagues ahead of the other dishes he had judged today. Without hesitation, he took a small bite, scooping up a mix of rice, diced pork, corn, and other ingredients. The moment it hit his tongue, a burst of flavor followed. The rice was perfectly cooked, with just the right amount of moisture and a pleasant fried fragrance. The diced pork was tender, the corn added a subtle sweetness, and the ham brought a savory depth. Mita had never expected such richness from a simple plate of fried rice. Unable to resist, he took several more bites in quick succession. Stopping himself reluctantly, he glanced at the remaining fried rice, visibly impressed. If it weren't for the fact that he needed to save room for the rest of the students' dishes, he might have devoured the entire plate. Manager Mita, could you provide a score? The head teacher, who had been watching silently, was equally astonished. Throughout the day, Mita had only sampled the other students' dishes with minimal interest. But now, with Sway's dish, he had clearly been captivated. Mita fell silent, contemplating the score. He was at a loss. How could he grade this dish appropriately? The greatest strength of your fried rice is that it has no weaknesses. Manager Mita said slowly. Whether it's the rice, pork, or corn, the ingredients blend seamlessly together without a single flaw. No flaws. Sway was taken aback. Just last night, when he had tasted it himself, he found several obvious shortcomings. Yet here, it was considered flawless. But then he remembered the tongue of God he possessed, and felt reassured. What he could taste didn't necessarily mean that ordinary people could pick up on those subtleties. Indeed, manager Mita nodded. What's the name of this fried rice? Sinengig fried rice with pork, a very common fried rice from my home country, Sway replied. Manager Mita's expression shifted to one of understanding. This is the best fried rice I've ever tasted. I'll give it a score of 93. The moment the score was announced, the classroom fell silent, then, chaos erupted. What did Sway score? 93. That's 4 points higher than the class leader. No way. When did he get this good? Even Yuzuki, the class leader, had a fleeting look of shock in her usually composed eyes. Though confident in her abilities, she never expected Sway to surpass her, especially in a test like this. Luna's eyes widened in disbelief, staring at Sway in amazement. The head teacher, responsible for recording the scores, hesitated. His hands shook as he asked, "Manager, are you certain?" "Yes, are you really sure?" Sway also questioned, still in disbelief. His fried rice had barely passed the system's criteria, and yet he received such a high score here. The already stunned students nearly choked upon hearing Sway's doubt. "What are you so surprised about? We're the ones who should be shocked," they thought. Manager Mita, also a bit speechless, composed himself before replying firmly, "Yes, I'm sure. Your dish is flawless in every way, but it lacks a standout feature. If it had an eye-catching highlight, the score could have been even higher." Suddenly recalling something, Mita pulled out a business card and handed it to Sway. "By the way, Sway, right? Would you be interested in joining Kagura Sakaya as a trainee chef?" Mita said, with a serious yet excited tone. "Honestly, I didn't expect to meet another student with such potential." The surrounding students watched the exchange with envy in their eyes. Wasn't the whole reason they were studying here to land a good job after graduation? "Well," Sway hesitated. "I might not have much free time." Mita chuckled. "No need to worry. We have an agreement with your school, and we offer special arrangements for student interns. You can come whenever you're free. And the pay is 5,000 yen per hour." When Sway heard the salary, a significant 5 times more than a typical part-time job, he thought it over and decided to take the business card. 8 comments 0 vote. Chapter 12. Fantasy Ingredient 2. Later, under the envious gazes of his classmates, Sway returned to his seat. "Wow, when did you get so good?" Luna ran over, smiling with delight. 5,000 yen per hour. That's better than running a family business. And you're just a trainee chef. Yeah, Sway nodded, smiling back, feeling a bit pleased himself. By the way, do you still have any of that sinangag fried rice left? Luna asked, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. There's still a bit left. Would you like to try some? Sway laughed. Yes, please. Luna eagerly nodded. Sway scooped a small bowl of the remaining fried rice from the pot and handed it to her. She grabbed a spoon, excitedly taking a bite. How is it? Sway asked. The moment the fried rice hit her tongue, Luna's body trembled slightly, as though struck by lightning. Her eyes widened as she exclaimed, Sway, this is amazing. I've never had fried rice this good. With skills like this, you'll never go hungry in the future. Really? Sway smiled, amused. Not going hungry. What does that even mean? At that moment, a cool voice interrupted them. Can I have a taste too? Sway turned and saw Yuzuki Shizunoya standing there. Of course, Sway replied, handing her the last portion of the fried rice. Luna stared longingly at the dish, swallowing hard, while Sway chuckled. You can always come to me if you want more in the future. I'll hold you to that. Luna grinned mischievously. From now on, whenever I want to eat, I'm coming straight to you. No need to say that, Sway laughed. Don't we have that kind of relationship already? On the other side, Yuzuki accepted the fried rice from Sway. The rich aroma filled the air as she curiously took a bite. Her eyes immediately widened, a flash of surprise crossing her face. The sweet corn, tender diced pork, and fragrant rice, coated in a light egg wash, were indeed flawless. In terms of ingredient handling, it far surpassed her own pork curry. Yuzuki had always prided herself on being the best in class, but now, she had to admit, Sway had outdone her. Your dish is much better than mine, Yuzuki sighed. Can I taste yours? Sway asked. Caught off guard, Yuzuki hesitated for a moment before nodding. Sure. She offered Sway a portion of her pork curry, which he tasted with a spoon, and Luna quickly grabbed her own spoon to try it as well. It's delicious. Luna exclaimed, eyes wide. Sway nodded in agreement. It's good. You marinated the chicken with white soy sauce and sake, didn't you? Yuzuki's eyes widened in shock. How had he tasted exactly what she used to marinate the chicken? That's right, she nodded, still amazed. You marinated it for a bit too short, so the flavors haven't fully developed. Also, the curry sauce is a little thin, next time, try using less water. Sway suggested. Yuzuki fell into deep thought, her eyes growing brighter. Sway's insights pinpointed the exact weaknesses in her dish. If she applied his advice, she was certain it would turn out even better next time. Yuzuki looked at Sway intently, as if seeing him in a new light for the first time. Thank you, Sway. No problem, Sway responded casually. The other students, who had been quietly watching, were stunned. Sway was giving cooking advice to the class leader. And she seemed pleased with it. Sway, you've suddenly become so impressive. Luna exclaimed, still unable to believe how much Sway had changed over the break. From that moment on, the attitude of the students toward Sway shifted noticeably. There was now a hint of respect and awe in their eyes. Sway, however, didn't mind. He never had close ties with them, and wasn't looking to form new friendships anyway. Later, while taking a short break, Sway received a system notification. The mission is complete. Would you like to see the new ingredient? Yes, Sway replied. Suddenly, a long, slightly ominous-looking matsutake mushroom appeared in his hand, giving off a rich, creamy scent. He quickly clicked on the ingredient description. Cream matsutake mushrooms. Grade: C fantasy ingredient. Origin: gourmet captive. Description: with the natural fragrance of matsutake mushrooms enhanced by a rich, creamy aroma, this ingredient is delicious whether eaten on its own or cooked with other dishes. Sway caught the enticing creamy aroma and felt a rush of anticipation to try it in a dish. However, now wasn't the time, and he had to hold back his excitement. The host has received a new task: cooking fantasy ingredients for the first time. Mission description: attempt to create a dish using fantasy ingredients and gain the taster's approval. Reward: 1 almond cabbage fantasy ingredient. Time: within 3 days. A second fantasy ingredient. Sway's eyes lit up. However, the next few classes were all theoretical, with no cooking sessions in sight, so it seemed impossible to complete the task during class hours. When I get home, I'll make it for the Tsunere girl. Maybe she will like it too. Sway thought, imagining how delighted Arena would be tasting the fried rice made with new ingredients. The school day soon ended. Sway, let's go home together. Luna beamed as soon as the bell rang. She approached Sway's desk with a smile as bright as a flower. Sure, let's go, Sway replied, returning her smile. He, too, enjoyed the lively and sincere company of his childhood friend. At that moment, a colder voice interrupted, Sway. 8 comments 0 vote. Chapter 13. Let's start by washing dishes. Sway glanced up to see the class leader, Yuzuki, standing by his desk. Sway, are you going to work today? If so, you can come with me, she said. Yes, Sway replied. He didn't have plans for the evening, so earning some extra money seemed like a good idea. Ah, are you going to work too, leader? Luna asked, surprised. Everyone knew Yuzuki came from a wealthy family, so her working part-time seemed odd. Seeing Luna's curiosity, Yuzuki explained, I want to become an excellent chef, so I'm training myself. All right then, let's go together, Sway nodded and then turned to Luna, apologizing, sorry Luna, I won't be able to go home with you today. Though a bit disappointed, Luna smiled understandingly, it's okay, Sway. Go ahead and do your thing. The three walked to the school gate together, where Luna waved goodbye. See you tomorrow, Sway. See you. Sway waved back with a grin. As Sway and Yuzuki walked side by side past the school gate, their fellow students cast surprised glances. Yuzuki was well known as one of the school's beauties, and seeing her with a boy caused quite a stir. Isn't that Yuzuki? Who's the guy with her? Whispered a nearby student. I heard he's a classmate of hers. Apparently, he cooked an amazing dish in class today and was invited by the manager of Kagura Sakaya, another student responded. No way. That's impressive, a third chimed in. Sway remained calm despite the murmurs, but Yuzuki's cheeks flushed lightly. Just ignore them, Sway advised. Okay, she replied softly. After a brief pause, she asked, I heard you and Luna have known each other since childhood. Yeah, we've been in the same class since kindergarten, Sway answered, a fond smile appearing as he thought of his round-faced, cheerful friend. That's really enviable, Yuzuki remarked with a sigh. Soon after, the pair arrived at Kagura Sakaya, a quiet establishment nestled in a bustling part of the city, surrounded by trees. Its interior felt more like a cozy cafe than a typical restaurant, with elegant decor. This was Sway's first time visiting such a high-end restaurant, and he couldn't help but admire the place. The moment they stepped inside, a waiter familiar with Yuzuki greeted them. Miss Yuzuki, here to work again? The waiter asked politely. She nodded, and the waiter turned his attention to Sway. Is this your classmate? Yes, he was invited by the manager to intern here, she explained. The waiter looked at Sway with a newfound respect. To be invited for an internship at such a young age was a sign of great potential. Sway, glad to see you. A voice called out. It was manager Mita, who had just emerged from the restaurant's lounge. His eyes sparkled with enthusiasm when he spotted Sway. So, you're planning to work here tonight? Yes, Sway nodded. Great. I'll settle your pay after we close, Mita said with a smile. Thank you, Sui replied sincerely. After that, Sui followed Yuzuki to the kitchen. It was spacious and spotlessly clean, unlike the backrooms of most restaurants, where grime often gathered. Several chefs were already busy with their tasks. Oh, Yuzuki. Here for your internship again. A curvaceous chef with burgundy hair and a fiery aura greeted Yuzuki. Yes, Sister Sakai, Yuzuki responded politely. Sakai then turned her gaze to Sui, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. Is this handsome guy your boyfriend, Yuzuki? She teased. Yuzuki, blushing slightly, quickly clarified, no, he's just my classmate. He's also interning as a chef here starting today. The chefs in the kitchen stopped what they were doing, intrigued by the new face. Hey, Yuzuki, do you have any students in your class as skilled as you? Asked a tall, middle-aged man with curly blonde hair, his tone laced with surprise. Yes, Senior Alpha. Sui is incredibly talented, Yuzuki nodded in response. Oh. Even better than you, Yuzuki. How come I haven't heard of him before? Another chef chimed in, a stocky, middle-aged man dressed in a traditional Japanese chef's outfit with a headscarf, his voice filled with curiosity. Everyone in the kitchen had assumed Yuzuki was the top student in her class. No one expected there to be someone of her caliber. No matter how good he is, he's just a student with no real experience. He can start by washing the dishes, Alpha said dismissively. As a chef with over 20 years of experience, Alpha naturally looked down on rookies, especially those fresh out of school with little practical knowledge. A few other chefs exchanged looks of mild contempt, clearly doubting Sui's abilities. Alpha, don't be like that. The kid is pretty handsome, isn't he? Miss Sakai teased, brushing her hand across Sui's cheek before blowing playfully into his face. The sudden warmth of her breath and the proximity of her figure made Sui reflexively swallow, but he quickly regained his composure. Deep down, he preferred the more challenging, tsundere type. Don't feel bad, little one. I started out just like you, washing dishes, Miss Sakai added, giving Sui's shoulder a reassuring pat. Sui nodded, fully aware that in most restaurants, especially high-end establishments, newcomers were expected to do the menial tasks. It was a long road to becoming a chef and creating dishes on their own. He remembered how the top students at Tatsuki, even those from wealthy backgrounds, began their internships by washing dishes and mopping floors. Those were the same prodigies from Japan's No. 1 cooking school. Even Irina, the proudest of them all, had been assigned to dishwashing duties during her internship. Of course, being the headstrong person she was, Irina had refused to follow the rules and ended up taking control of the kitchen within just 3 days. At that moment, Manager Mita walked in and addressed Sui. Sui, what type of cuisine are you most proficient in? I'll add it to the menu later. 9 comments 0 vote. Download the app for greater interaction. You can chat with me about my writing experience apart from the comments section. IamNoob. Download app now. Chapter 14. Only one dish. The entire kitchen fell silent at Mita's words. Manager, are you sure about this? You're going to let him cook on his own? Alpha asked, his voice thick with disbelief. The other chefs were equally stunned. Miss Sakai's eyes sparkled with a mix of surprise and admiration as she patted Sui on the shoulder, smiling. Well. Seems like you're quite impressive after all, little brother. Even Sui was caught off guard. Shouldn't I start with chores, like washing dishes? He asked, confused. That won't be necessary, Manager Mita replied with a smile. After a year of internship, Miss Yuzuki has already begun preparing dishes on her own. I tasted your food this morning and, to be honest, I think you're even more skilled at handling ingredients than she is. You're ready to take charge in the kitchen. What? Came the collective gasp from the chefs, unable to hide their shock. Alpha and several chefs stared at Sui in disbelief. Having worked with Yuzuki for a year, they were well aware of her talent. While her cooking skills hadn't yet surpassed theirs, they knew she was rapidly improving and would soon be on their level. The fact that she had such potential already surprised them. But now, someone was telling them that Sui was even better than her. By the way, Sui, tell me all the dishes you excel at, Manager Mita asked. According to our policy, you'll earn a commission for every dish sold. Sui nodded. Sinangig fried rice, he answered simply. Manager Mita jotted it down and asked, anything else? Anything else? No, that's it for now, Sui replied. Though he could prepare other dishes, Sinangig fried rice was currently his best option. Just one dish. Mita was taken aback. Yes, is there a problem? Sui asked, sensing the manager's surprise. Oh, no, nothing, Mita quickly responded, though he couldn't hide his disappointment. Could I have misjudged him? He thought to himself. He had been convinced that Sway had incredible potential, but could he really only cook one dish? If that were true, it would be hard for him to survive in the culinary industry. No matter how good a dish is, diners will eventually grow tired of it if it's the only thing on offer. Even Yuzuki was puzzled. She had seen Sway demonstrate his skills when he prepared his dish. She had thought he was on par with her level, but now it turned out he only specialized in one dish. Miss Sakai was equally surprised. It was highly unusual for a chef to be proficient in just a single dish. Alpha let out a laugh. I told you, it's not so easy for students to take charge here. They're still just students after all. Miss Sakai nodded in agreement. You've mastered too few dishes. To become a high-level chef, you need a deep understanding of ingredients and various cuisines. Your knowledge is still far too narrow. Sway nodded, fully aware of this truth. However, with the help of his god tongue, he believed he could quickly make up for this gap. Well, let's give it a try today and see how the customers respond, Manager Mita said after a brief hesitation. If I'm not cooking, I'll start with some chores, Sway suggested, sensing the manager's hesitation and trying to ease the tension. Sway's apartment. The bathroom door creaked open slightly. After confirming the room was dark and empty, a figure stealthily emerged and switched on the light. It was Irina, and she had slipped into Sway's apartment. Phew, he's still not back, she sighed in relief before remembering her purpose. Hurriedly, she went over to Sway's wardrobe and began rummaging through it. What size does this annoying guy wear? I forgot to ask earlier, she muttered to herself. As she searched, her hand suddenly grasped something, and her face turned crimson in an instant. It was one of Sway's underwear. With a startled gasp, Irina threw it aside as if it had shocked her. Gross. Where do people even put the size on clothes? She wanted to cry in frustration. She had little experience with everyday chores. Most of her personal tasks had always been taken care of by her aide, Hisako Arato. She had never even had to check clothing sizes before. Meanwhile, Sway was completely unaware that someone had broken into his apartment. Back in the bustling Kagura Sakaya restaurant, it was peak dining time, and the kitchen staff, including Sway, were all busy handling the rush. However, none of Sway's dishes had been ordered. Part of the reason was his lack of reputation. He was new, and in high-end restaurants, patrons are picky, not just about the food, but also the chef behind it. Why would anyone pay a premium price to try a dish from a chef they didn't know? The other issue was Sway's limited repertoire. He only had one dish to offer. Hey, new kid. We're out of bowls, hurry up and wash the ones we just used. One chef barked. We're out of steaks too. Go fetch some more from storage, another instructed. Someone spilled soup here. New guy, mop up this mess. Naturally, Sway found himself relegated to doing menial tasks. He was often scolded and ordered around, but he didn't mind. The kitchen followed harsh rules, respect was earned through skill, and he hadn't proven his yet. At Tatsuki Culinary Academy, even top students who were destined to become world-renowned chefs had to start at the bottom during their internships. Sway had no complaints. After all, this was part-time work for him. Meanwhile, Yuzuki, who was also an intern, was treated much better. Thanks to her charm and status as a student, she was quite popular with customers. A month earlier, Manager Mita had already given her the opportunity to cook independently, and her dishes had received glowing reviews. If no one's ordering your food, you might as well start washing dishes. The kitchen is a cruel place, Alpha remarked dismissively. If you only know how to cook one dish, you're not cut out to be a chef, another chef added, mockingly. Don't worry, Sway, Yuzuki said kindly. With your talent, you'll be able to prepare dishes soon enough. Sway smiled and nodded. Thanks, Yuzuki. Just then. Oh no, Miss Hanaya has arrived. Someone called out, causing a stir in the kitchen. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 15. The Challenge Mission. Oh no, Miss Hanaya is here. A waiter rushed into the kitchen, his voice filled with urgency. What? Miss Hanaya. Wasn't she supposed to come next month? One of the chefs exclaimed in shock. Why is she here so early this year? Another chef muttered, a look of unease spreading across the kitchen. The chefs' expressions shifted dramatically, concern evident on their faces. Sensing the tension, Sway turned to Yuzuki, puzzled. Yuzuki, who exactly is this Miss Hanaya? He asked. Yuzuki's face grew serious. She's a renowned food critic, someone whose reviews are treated like gospel by many diners. But her reputation? It's as vicious as her tongue, she explained. Vicious is putting it lightly, Miss Sakai chimed in. Her nickname is the devil of the culinary world. Even at prestigious restaurants, she doesn't hold back. Her critiques are ruthless. Miss Sakai continued, there were 2 high-end restaurants that were doing well until her scathing reviews decimated their reputation. They ended up closing. She's a nightmare for anyone in the culinary industry. That's right, Manager Mita said as he entered the room. Miss Hanaya comes to our restaurant every year to review our dishes, but we've been lucky enough to get favorable reviews each time. Hearing Manager Mita's words, the chefs visibly relaxed, though the anxiety lingered. Even though she's here a month earlier than expected, we can't afford to get complacent. Treat her as our most important guest, Manager Mita instructed gravely. The chefs all nodded in agreement. Now, do your best and prepare your finest dishes for Miss Hanaya, Manager Mita commanded. Suddenly, Yuzuki turned to him and asked, Manager, what about Sway? Him. Alpho scoffed dismissively. Forget it. For an event like this, it's too risky to let a student take charge. We need to guarantee Miss Hanaya's approval. Many of the chefs nodded in agreement, supporting Alpho's cautious approach. If Sway's dish failed to impress, or worse, displeased her, it could have serious consequences for the restaurant. Manager Mita hesitated for a moment but finally spoke. Sway, you can make a dish as well. Manager, isn't that a bit risky? Alpho asked, his brows furrowed. It's fine, Mita replied. After all, it's just an intern's dish. It's not guaranteed that Miss Hanaya will even taste it. As soon as the manager left, the kitchen burst into activity. Every chef was focused on preparing their best dishes, working swiftly but carefully. Meanwhile, a voice suddenly spoke in Sway's mind, it was the system. The difficulty of the host's mission has been upgraded. Upgraded mission. Recognition by a gourmet. Mission description. Use a dish with fantasy ingredients and earn the approval of a discerning foodie. Reward. 2 almond cabbages and sautéed cabbage recipe. The host may choose between the upgraded mission or the original one. The reward for the original mission remains unchanged. Sway stared at the system prompt, frowning. What happens if I choose the harder mission but fail? He asked. If you fail, the original mission will be cancelled. The system replied. That's tricky, Sway thought. If he chose the easier mission, he could still get a reward, an almond cabbage. But if he picked the harder mission, the reward would be greater, 2 almond cabbages plus a recipe. However, failure meant he'd get nothing. After a moment of internal struggle, Sway gritted his teeth and declared, I'll take on the upgraded mission. Understood. The host has chosen the higher challenge. Please complete it as soon as possible, the system responded. Kagura Sakaya Hall. In the main dining hall of Kagura Sakaya, all the guests had been temporarily asked to leave. Nitsuki Hanaya sat alone at the long dining table, her arms crossed and her face devoid of emotion. The waiters carefully placed dish after dish in front of her, while the chef stood on the sidelines, nervously awaiting her judgment. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone on edge. Sway, standing among the chefs, curiously observed the infamous food critic, known as the devil of the culinary world. To his surprise, the critic who struck fear into every chef didn't seem that much older than him. She appeared only 2 or 3 years his senior, with long blonde hair, fair skin, and delicate features. Her cold, sharp gaze, however, set her apart. For a moment, Sway thought she resembled Irina. Not in appearance, but in the same regal and intimidating aura they both carried. Still, he couldn't help but think, between the two, he find the Tsunere girl much cuter. This is the work of all the chefs at our restaurant, so please, enjoy. Manager Mita calmly walked over and spoke in a deep, respectful tone. Nitsuki Hanaya nodded slightly, her gaze sweeping over the table. She pointed at a dish and said, let's start with this steak. The dish in question was a pan-seared steak, Alpho's creation. Hanaya delicately cut a small piece with her knife and tasted it. Alpho, standing nearby, swallowed nervously, his heart racing. The other chefs, equally anxious, watched intently. However, Nitsuki Hanaya didn't offer any feedback. She took just one bite, set her knife and fork down, and pointed to another dish, next, the assorted tempura. Sway recognized this dish as the work of the older chef dressed in traditional attire. One by one, Nitsuki sampled each dish on the table, never taking more than a single bite, and providing no evaluation. The final dish she tasted was Yuzuki's pork curry with rice. After placing her chopsticks down and wiping the corners of her mouth with a napkin, Manager Mita, clearly anxious, stepped forward and asked, Miss Hanaya, are you satisfied with today's meal? Well, it tastes the same as the previous 2 years, she replied with a nod. Hearing this, manager Mita and the chefs visibly relaxed. For the past 2 years, Natsuki had given their restaurant favorable reviews, so if this year's food tasted the same, there should be no problem. But Natsuki's next words froze their smiles in place. So, I'll give it a bad review. Her tone was light, but the impact was heavy. 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 16. Sinengig fried rice with cream matsutake mushrooms. What? But didn't you say it tastes the same as before? Manager Mita stammered, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Is it the service or something else? The problem lies in the taste itself, Natsuki responded coldly. Everyone was even more bewildered. The atmosphere became tense. Alpho, struggling to keep his composure, stepped forward and bowed. Miss Hanaya, you said the taste is the same as in previous years. So why are you dissatisfied with the food this time? The same question weighed on the minds of everyone in the room. Because there's been no progress, Natsuki replied, her face emotionless. 2 years ago, it tasted like this. Last year, it was still the same. And now, nothing has changed. She continued, her voice sharp, if a restaurant doesn't evolve, it regresses. Without innovation, it will eventually die. Her words sent a chill through the room. Sweat trickled down the chefs' faces, and even Sui could see Miss Sakai's chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. This pan-seared steak, it's your work, right? Natsuki asked, pointing at Alpho's dish. Yes, it is, Alpho replied nervously. You served this same dish 2 years ago. While the steak is cooked properly, the red wine sauce still has the same flaw it did then. In 3 years, you've made no improvement. Her critique was like a slap to Alpho's face, leaving him pale and speechless. And this assorted tempura, Natsuki turned to the older chef. That's my dish, he admitted, his voice trembling. The frying technique is flawed, just like last year's dish of fried tofu. The issue remains in the heat control. Her cold assessment hit hard. She continued reviewing the other dishes, each chef growing paler as she listed their shortcomings. The only dish with any promise is the pork curry. The technique is still rough, and the flavor lacks depth, but it's solid with no glaring faults. She looked at Yuzuki and asked, you made this, right? I don't recall seeing you the past 2 years. Yes, I'm a new intern here, Yuzuki confirmed. You show potential. It won't take long for you to surpass this stagnant group, Natsuki commented coolly. But one decent dish won't satisfy me. I'll be publishing these remarks in the next issue of the food magazine. Her declaration left the entire kitchen in shock. Miss Hanaya, please, give us another chance. Manager Mita pleaded, his face drained of color. If those remarks were published, it would ruin the restaurant's reputation. The other chefs looked equally distraught. A bad review from this woman would follow them for life, tarnishing their careers. I gave you a second chance last year. There won't be a third. Natsuki's voice was final as she prepared to leave. Desperate, manager Mita fell to his knees. Please, we beg you for another chance. As he grumbled, a nagging feeling tugged at the back of his mind. It felt like he had forgotten something important, but he couldn't recall what it was. Natsuki turned her head slightly, disdain in her eyes. I never give second chances to failures. She began walking toward the door. Suddenly, a voice interrupted, wait, there's still one more dish you haven't tried. Another dish. Natsuki paused, looking puzzled. Yes, there's one more, Yuzuki confirmed. At this reminder, manager Mita remembered, Sui's dish hadn't been served yet. Because Sui was an intern, Mita had deliberately placed his dish at the end, unintentionally overlooking it. Still, despite remembering, Mita had little hope. If the more experienced chefs hadn't impressed Natsuki, what chance did an intern have? Is this the dish? Natsuki asked, pointing to a plate at the far end of the table, where a small bowl had been placed. Yes, it's mine, Sui stepped forward. The dish was sinengig fried rice made with cream matsutake mushrooms, the first time Sui had used fantasy ingredients. According to the system, these ingredients would enhance the dish, though he wasn't sure how. He was nervous. If he failed this challenge, he would lose his chance to complete the initial mission. Sinengig fried rice. Natsuki's lips curled in a mocking smile. In a high-end restaurant, of all places. How quaint. She shook her head but sat down again. Fine. Out of courtesy, I'll taste it. The rest of the kitchen staff had little expectation, with some already turning to leave. The waiter placed the dish in front of Natsuki and lifted the bowl covering it. A rich aroma filled the room, a mix of creamy and earthy scents that immediately caught everyone's attention. Natsuki's indifferent expression vanished, replaced with one of surprise. Those who had already started walking away stopped and turned back. The golden fried rice, speckled with vibrant reds, yellows, and greens, looked beautiful, and the creamy fragrance made it irresistibly appetizing. Natsuki's expression turned serious. She picked up a spoon, scooped a bite, and brought it to her mouth. As the soft, fragrant rice touched her tongue, an explosion of flavors overwhelmed her senses. Her pupils shrank. This dish. 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 17. The Taste of Longing. 5-year-old Natsuki Hanaya ran into the house, tears streaming down her face. What's the matter, Natsuki? Were you bullied again? A woman knelt down, scooped her up, and asked gently with a smile. Natsuki, still sobbing, nodded in response. How about a snack? Mommy made fried rice for you. The woman handed her a bowl of golden, fragrant fried rice. Seeing the bowl of fried rice in front of her, Natsuki momentarily forgot her tears. A bright, joyful smile appeared on her face. Mommy's fried rice is the best, she exclaimed. Back in the present, Natsuki Hanaya closed her eyes and smiled contentedly. It's my mother's taste. This dish reminded her of the fried rice her mother used to make for her as a child, the warmest and most comforting taste she had ever known. As everyone in the room watched Natsuki smiling, they were utterly shocked. What's happening? That cold, fearsome woman, actually smiling like this? No way. Alpha and the other chefs were in disbelief. The woman who terrified every chef in the kitchen was now smiling with the innocence of a child. Natsuki slowly returned to reality, still feeling the warmth in her heart and a deep sense of happiness. For the first time in a long while, her worries seemed to vanish, and she felt lighter, as if she had returned to the carefree days of her childhood. Sui, observing her transformation, was stunned. Was the effect of this dish really that powerful? He thought to himself. Natsuki, who had been so cold and distant moments ago, was now smiling like a carefree young girl. The contrast was remarkable. The dish is flawless in every aspect, Natsuki said softly, her expression gentle as she looked at Sui. And beyond that, it has a unique creamy flavor. She paused, then added, but what's most important is that, even though this is a humble dish, it brings a kind of happiness that's rare to find. Thank you for the compliment, Sui replied, feeling a mix of pride and relief. Your name is Sui, right? I won't forget it. Natsuki Hanaya stood up, her tone softer than anyone in the room had ever heard. I'll be publishing my full review in the next issue of the food magazine. At her words, Manager Mita and the other chefs erupted in joy. Amazing. We did it. They shouted excitedly. Natsuki smiled gently, then added, thank you for this dish. It brought back the taste of my mother's cooking. Her face softened even more, and it was clear she felt relaxed, more so than she had in a long time. She even felt a strange urge to hum a song, something entirely out of character for her. It must be because this dish reminded me of home, she thought. You're very welcome, Sui replied with a smile. After leaving the restaurant, Natsuki sat in her car for a moment, reflecting. She pulled out her phone and sent a tweet. Thanks to a young chef, I was able to experience the taste of my mother's cooking again. It was a dish filled with happiness and nostalgia. As a famous food critic known for her harsh reviews, this unexpected message immediately sparked a frenzy among her fans. If the demon critic praised it like this, how incredible must the food have been? Within moments, the tweet was retweeted thousands of times and liked by tens of thousands. Meanwhile, back in the restaurant, Manager Mita bowed deeply to Sui. Sui, we owe it all to you. Thanks to your dish, our restaurant's reputation will remain intact. Alpha, Miss Sakai, and the other chefs looked on, their expressions complex. None of them had expected that Sui would be the one to save the day. It was nothing, really, manager, Sui said as he helped the man up. After all, the restaurant had given him this opportunity to work. You were amazing, Sui. Yuzuki chimed in. She had never imagined that Sui's skills would be so far beyond her own. You're great too, Sui replied with a smile. Didn't Miss Hanaya also compliment you? Just then, a voice spoke in Sui's mind. The host has completed the upgraded mission and earned 2 almond cabbages and a sautéed cabbage recipe. Additionally, for producing a dish rated over 80, an extra culinary skill level 2 is awarded. Wow, with the God's tongue skill, progress is faster than I thought, Sui muttered happily to himself. By the way, Sui, Yuzuki interrupted, what kind of ingredient did you use in that dish? It had such a unique creamy fragrance. Oh, I used a special ingredient, Sui replied casually. Can I see it? Yuzuki asked eagerly. Curiosity piqued, the other chefs gathered around as well. They too had noticed the rich, creamy aroma in the sinangag fried rice and were intrigued. Sure, Sway agreed, disappearing into the kitchen for a moment. He returned with 2 long, cream golden colored matsutake mushrooms. This is what I used. Yuzuki took a sniff, her eyes lighting up. Matsutake mushrooms. And what a rich creamy fragrance. Miss Sakai chimed in, equally astonished. The quality is incredible. The other chefs, well versed in high-end ingredients, were also taken aback. They had never seen matsutake mushrooms with such a strong fragrance and a creamy twist. Sway, would you sell me some of these? The price isn't an issue, Miss Sakai asked eagerly. Yes, please sell some to me too. Yuzuki added. The other chefs looked on, clearly envious. But Sway shook his head. Sorry, I don't have much of it myself. Disappointed, the 2 women sighed. They understood, though. Ingredients of this quality were rare. But I can give you a little to experiment with, Sway offered. Really? Yuzuki and Miss Sakai's eyes brightened with excitement. Of course. I don't have much, so I can only share a small portion. Sway handed over a small piece to each of them, and their excitement was palpable. They could barely contain their urge to rush back into the kitchen and start experimenting. Alpho and the others watched enviously. Alpho, in particular, was filled with regret. If only I had been friendlier with Sway earlier. 5 comments 0 vote. Chapter 18, Cute. Due to Natsuki Hanaya's visit, the restaurant closed earlier than usual that day. After finishing the cleanup, Sway was preparing to leave when manager Mita suddenly stopped him. Here's your pay for today. He handed Sway an envelope. Sway took it, surprised by its thickness. Curiosity got the better of him, and he opened the envelope to find a thick stack of 10,000 yen bills, roughly 200,000 yen in total. Isn't this a bit much? Sway frowned, feeling uneasy. He had only worked for about 4 hours, and his wages should have been closer to 20,000 yen. This was 10 times more than expected. It's a thank you bonus. Please accept it. Manager Mita bowed sincerely. It's really not necessary, Sway replied, though he was short on cash. It's my job as a chef to satisfy our customers. A glimmer of admiration appeared in Manager Mita's eyes. He then explained, we also give chefs a share of each dish sold, and since you used high-quality ingredients, this is your portion. Sway paused, then nodded. That's true. In the end, he couldn't refuse the gesture and accepted the money. Sway, starting today, you are officially contracted as one of Kagura Sakaya's chefs. Manager Mita announced with a proud smile. Congratulations. Thank you, manager, Sway replied, humbled. No need to thank me, Mita laughed. You've earned it through your own skills. Yuzuki, who had watched the exchange, couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy. She had been working at the restaurant for a year and still hadn't achieved this level, yet Sway had done it in just 1 day. Later, Sway and Yuzuki boarded the tram together to head home. At one of the stations, they parted ways, and Sway returned to his rented apartment alone. Feeling pleased with his day and the 200,000 yen he'd earned, enough to last for a while, he settled in. As he sat down and took a sip of water, the bathroom door suddenly opened, and Irina walked out. Without a word, she tossed something at him. This is your school uniform for Tatsuki Academy, she said with a huff. Make sure you wear it to the freshman ceremony tomorrow. Sway held up the uniform and compared the size. It fit perfectly. Thanks, he said. HMPH, no need to thank me, Irina replied with her usual pride. If you really want to show gratitude, work hard and make more exceptional dishes. Suddenly, Sway looked at her in surprise. Wait. How do you know my clothing size? Irina's face immediately turned red. Why are you asking so many questions? I just picked a random set, she stammered. Really? Sway squinted at her, suspicion creeping into his voice. You didn't go through my clothes, did you? Of course not. I would never do such a thing. Irina's face flushed even more, her voice growing louder and more frantic. She fumbled over her words, clearly flustered. Sway continued to eye her suspiciously. He had only been joking, but her reaction made it clear, she wasn't great at lying. What's with that look? Irina snapped defensively. As if I'd ever go through your smelly, dirty clothes. Irina Nakiri shouted angrily. Okay, I got it, Sway responded helplessly. Seeing his indifferent attitude, Irina felt her anger flare up even more, her teeth clenching in frustration. How infuriating. After Irina stormed off, Sway wandered into the bathroom and noticed that everything was labeled with her name. He couldn't help but chuckle to himself. Is she really this strict about keeping things separate? He thought. He then absent-mindedly walked into Irina's bedroom, only to realize she was in the middle of changing. Her face flushed bright red the moment she saw him. "Didn't I tell you not to enter a girl's bedroom without permission?" she yelled, flustered. "And close the door." Sway, catching a glimpse of her soft skin and a cute bear pattern on her underwear, quickly turned away, embarrassed. "Sorry," he muttered as he closed the door behind him. From the other side of the door, Irina's frustration only grew. "I said to leave first, then close the door," she shouted, her forehead covered in metaphorical black lines of anger. Sway awkwardly scratched his nose. "I saw the labels in the bathroom," he said, trying to change the subject. "That's right," Irina snapped. "From now on, our personal belongings are strictly separated. Don't touch anything of mine." "Understood," Sway replied, nodding. "By the way, Irina, I need to borrow your kitchen." Irina's forehead twitched in frustration as she ground her teeth. "We're not close enough for you to call me by my first name. You can call me Irina-sama, or Miss Irina." "No problem, Irina," Sway said casually. "But can I use the kitchen?" Irina stared at him, speechless. This guy was going to drive her crazy. "The door's unlocked, just go," she snapped. "Thank you," Sway replied as he turned to leave. Suddenly, he stopped and looked back at her. "What now?" Irina asked impatiently. Sway grinned slightly. "Actually, I think the pink underwear from yesterday was cuter." "Get out!" she screamed, her face flushed with embarrassment. After entering the private kitchen, Sway took out the reward he had received, 2 enormous cabbages. "Wow, these are huge!" Sway exclaimed, marveling at their size. Normally, cabbages were the size of a human head, but these were 3 times bigger. Almond cabbage. Grade: C-class fantasy ingredient. Origin: gourmet captive. Description: though a vegetable, it has a taste and texture similar to almonds. It is a premium ingredient with the protein and sweetness of almonds and the crispness of cabbage. After reading the description, Sway checked the recipe. Shredded cabbage. Recipe grade: bronze. Effect: energizing. "Alright, let's practice shredding cabbage today," he said eagerly. Just as he was about to start. "Wow, what a huge cabbage!" came a surprised voice. Irina had entered the kitchen, her eyes wide with curiosity. She had never seen such a massive cabbage before. "It smells fresh and vibrant," she said as she tore off a small piece of a leaf and popped it into her mouth. Her eyes widened with delight. "It's so crisp and sweet, just like almonds. What an incredible flavor." For a moment, surprise flickered in her usually composed expression. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 19. Tacit collaboration in the kitchen. "It's so crisp and sweet, just like almonds. What an exquisite taste." Without hesitation, she concluded that this must be one of the finest ingredients in the world. "Can you sell it to me? Don't worry about the price." Irina was nothing if not direct. Sway found it amusing. It truly was in keeping with the style of the eldest daughter. "Forget it, I'll just give you one," he said casually. "You want to give it to me?" For the first time, Irina felt a bit awkward. "That's right. Consider it rent for your bathroom and kitchen." Sway waved his hand dismissively. "Well, thank you." Irina hesitated for a moment but finally accepted it. "Just so you know, you're the one offering it. I'm only accepting it reluctantly." Her cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked away, her voice a little awkward. After all, this was the first time she had accepted a gift from a boy. "Not very honest, are you?" Sway shook his head, amused. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Irina, embarrassed, snapped back, "Who's not being honest?" Okay, I get it," Sway replied impatiently. Seeing him like this made Irina even more upset. "By the way, Irina, how about tasting my dish?" Sway asked suddenly. If he could get feedback from 2 culinary elites, his progress would improve even faster. "I already told you, I'm not that familiar with you. Stop calling me by my first name." Her voice was tinged with dissatisfaction, but not as stern as before. "Got it, Irina." Sway's casual reply further annoyed her. "You can call me whatever you want, but if I'm tasting your dish, you'll have to taste mine too. Deal?" Irina nodded, then picked up an almond cabbage and headed toward the kitchen counter. She had long been eager to try this unique ingredient. On the other side, Sway chose some regular cabbage and other ingredients from the pantry to practice his cooking. He couldn't afford to waste almond cabbage on practice, so he settled for the usual kind. After heating the pan, he added lard, onions, garlic, and ginger, sautéing them until fragrant. Then he added dried chili peppers and peppercorns, followed by slices of pork belly. After a few moments, the pork belly was golden and crispy, releasing an enticing aroma. Half an hour later, Sway plated his stir-fried shredded cabbage. Taste yours first. Irina, who had already prepared her dish, had been waiting for Sway. Sure. They each took a pair of chopsticks and began tasting. Irina took a small bite, then quickly set her chopsticks down with a hint of disdain. Too much oil makes it greasy. And you haven't controlled the spice well. Plus, her critical nature kicked in as she listed several other shortcomings. This dish is far from perfect. There's still. Go. Sway nodded in agreement. The system had only given him a score of 12 points. True, and the pork belly isn't crispy enough. Next, it was time to taste Irina's dish. She had prepared a simple cabbage salad, washing the almond cabbage and adding a light dressing. Her main focus was on testing the unique ingredient. The almond cabbage was indeed delicious, sweet, crisp, and with a texture reminiscent of almonds. Before long, both Sway and Irina had finished the entire plate. As expected, it's a high-quality ingredient. Much better than regular cabbage in terms of sweetness and texture. Perfect for eating raw. Irina was visibly excited. Do you have any more of this cabbage? No, I got this from a special source. It's quite rare. Sway shook his head. Although Irina was disappointed, she understood. Such a precious ingredient couldn't be easy to come by. Afterward, they both returned to their respective dishes. Sway continued to practice his shredded cabbage, while Irina experimented further with the almond cabbage. Soon, 3 hours had passed. Here, this is my 4th attempt at shredded cabbage. Sway handed her the dish. HMPH. No matter how many times you try, it won't be easy to satisfy me. Irina's face was proud, but she picked up the chopsticks and placed a small piece in her mouth. But this time. Her eyes lit up with a flicker of surprise. The dish was spicy yet balanced by the crisp sweetness of the cabbage, and the pork belly was crispy and chewy. Well, what do you think? Sway asked. HMPH, this time it's passable. Irina sniffed, trying to hide her satisfaction. The heat control is still a bit off, though. It could be perfect with just a little more adjustment. But inside, she wasn't as composed as she let on. Because his progress was astonishing. While the first dish was full of flaws, by the fourth, it had reached the same level of proficiency. Aishi senpai, she thought, it may not be long before someone challenges you for the top seat. Indeed, Sway agreed. His system had awarded him a score of 72, marking a significant improvement. Next, they tasted Irina's French country-style cabbage stew. This time, the heat was off, and the beef lacks depth of flavor, Sway noted. Yes, I didn't pay enough attention this time, Irina Nakiri admitted, nodding. Previously, when testing dishes, she always relied on Hisako to taste them, but having Sway's input helped her quickly identify weaknesses. Through this experience, Irina realized the benefits of cooking together. They could point out each other's flaws in real time, leading to quicker improvement. This realization made her excited. She was confident her skills would improve rapidly if this continued. Afterward, the two retreated to their rooms to rest. Suddenly, Sway remembered that he hadn't requested leave from school yet. He sent a quick text to Yuzuki, asking for help with the leave request. They had exchanged contact information earlier. To Sway's surprise, Yuzuki responded quickly, saying it was no problem. Still awake this late? Maybe experimenting with new dishes. Sway mused to himself. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 20. The Awkward Life of Living Together. The next morning, Irina stood in the bathroom, dressed in pink pajamas with her blonde hair in disarray. A toothbrush was in her hand, and her mouth was foaming with toothpaste. Her forehead veins throbbed in frustration as she glanced at Sway, who stood beside her, brushing his teeth in front of the mirror. Can you move over a bit? You're squishing me. She mumbled through a mouthful of foam. At that moment, her usual elegant, composed image was nowhere to be seen. Sway sighed and took a step back. After rinsing his mouth, he spat the water out. Can you be more careful? You splashed it all over my face. Irina protested, near tears. Well, who told you to get up at the same time as me? Sway retorted. Today's the freshman ceremony. I have to go on stage to receive the award. Irina exclaimed in a mix of frustration and embarrassment. She had never lived like this with a boy before, and the thought that they would continue living together like this made her feel desperate. Her life, she thought, had taken a dark turn. The two of them finished their noisy morning routine and returned to their rooms. Sway, preparing for his first day at Tatsuki Culinary Academy, changed into the school's uniform. He knocked on Irina's door and asked, "Irina, are you ready?" Irina opened the door, now dressed in her school uniform. "How many times have I told you? Don't call me by my first name. You can address me as Irina-san, or Irina-sama." "No problem, Irina. In any case," she sighed, "when we get to Tatsuki, pretend you don't know me. I don't want anyone to know we're living together." "But we are living together, aren't we?" Sway replied hesitantly. "Don't say it like that. It sounds too suggestive." Irina growled, her forehead veins pulsing again. "I'm just forced to share the same bathroom with you." "Fine, fine," Sway replied, helpless. At that moment, Hisako's voice called from outside the door. "Irina-sama, are you ready? Don't forget, you're receiving an award today." Irina froze in shock. She had forgotten Hisako came to pick her up every morning. If Hisako found out a strange boy was in her room, her reputation would be ruined. "Is someone at the door?" Sway asked. "Irina-sama, did I just hear a boy's voice in your room?" Hisako called out from the hallway, surprised. No. You must have misheard." Irina responded, panic rising. "I'm coming in, Irina-sama." Footsteps approached, and the doorknob began to turn. In desperation, Irina shoved Sway onto the bed, threw the covers over him, and climbed in herself, trying to hide him. Just as the door opened, Hisako entered. I could have sworn I heard something," Hisako muttered to herself. Her eyes then landed on Irina, lying in bed, and she looked concerned. "Irina-sama, are you feeling all right?" Under the covers, Sway found himself overwhelmed by the scent of Irina's perfume. His face was pressed against something soft, and his nose was barely able to breathe. Instinctively, he opened his mouth, and his tongue brushed against whatever it was. It tasted sweet. Irina smiled awkwardly. I'm not feeling well, Hisako. You should head to school without me." Then, in a hushed voice directed at Sway, she muttered, "Stop licking me." Her face turned bright red as she realized what had just happened. The bastard's face was pressed against her chest, and he had licked her. She felt like collapsing on the spot. Hisako, looking worried, asked, "Irina-sama, where are you sick? And no, don't come any closer." Irina shouted, her voice rising in panic. "Just go ahead. I'll be fine." "All right," Hisako hesitated, "I'll go prepare some medicinal soup later." With that, she left. As soon as Hisako was gone, Irina leapt out of bed, her face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "Get out of here!" she yelled. Sway emerged from the covers, confused. "What did you cover my face with?" "I could barely breathe." Tears of frustration welled up in Irina's eyes. She couldn't even explain what had happened and resorted to yelling, "You pervert! Idiot! Scoundrel!" Sway was left bewildered, unsure of why she was so upset. At the freshman ceremony. "Now, please welcome the representative of the first-year students, Irina Nakiri, to the stage to receive the annual medal," announced the MC. "Wow, it's Miss Irina. Not only is she beautiful, but she's also the top student in her year. If I could date her for just one day, I'd die happy." One student said. "Are you trying to get expelled for saying something like that in Tatsuki?" Another replied. "Irina-sama, my goddess." A third shouted. But after waiting for a long time, Irina still hadn't appeared on stage. "Irina Nakiri. Irina Nakiri-san." The MC repeated anxiously. Meanwhile. "You idiot. Now I'm late for the freshman ceremony." Irina shouted as she rushed through the Tatsuki campus, her frustration spilling over. If any of the students saw her like this, they would be shocked. Was this really the elegant, untouchable queen of Tatsuki, Irina Nakiri? Sway shrugged helplessly. "Who told you to hide me under the covers?" 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 21. Shiomi-jun's spice class and daily tasks. As soon as Sway mentioned the incident, Irina couldn't help but blush, remembering the embarrassing moment when she had buried his face against her body. Flustered and frustrated, she snapped, "Anyway, on campus, we have nothing to do with each other. If you see me, don't even think about talking to me." "Got it," Sway replied with a shrug, his tone resigned. Afterward, the two parted ways and headed to their respective classes. Following the instructions Irina had given him earlier, Sway found his classroom without much trouble. Shortly after he settled in, the teacher arrived, signaling the start of the lesson. The instructor was a petite woman with a youthful face, glasses perched on her nose, and an ample chest that contrasted with her childlike appearance. Please form your assigned groups, and we'll begin the lesson. My name is Jun Shiomi, and I will be your instructor for the spice course moving forward, she said, walking to the front of the class and giving a polite bow. Though she looked no older than a middle schooler, Jun Shiomi was, in fact, 34 years old. Wait, is that Professor Jun? The youngest genius professor in Totsuki's history? One student murmured in surprise. Isn't she usually teaching second-year students? Looks like we're in for it now, another added, concern clear on their face. Meanwhile, Sui had found his assigned group. To his surprise, one of his partners was a blue-haired girl with long twin braids, a familiar and undeniably cute face. Isn't this Megumi Tadokuro? Sui thought, his eyes lighting up with recognition. He had always found her endearing. At that moment, Megumi's face had turned pale. She clasped her hands tightly in front of her chest, trembling as she spoke nervously, this is bad. I never expected our lecturer to be Professor Jun Shiomi. Really? She seems pretty approachable, Sui observed, looking at the petite professor who resembled a middle schooler. That's not the point. Megumi replied anxiously. Sure, Professor Shiomi is kind outside of class, but in the classroom, she's an absolute perfectionist. She's brilliant at research, but when it comes to teaching, she's incredibly strict and shows no mercy. Just then, a student timidly raised their hand and asked, Excuse me, Professor, what's today's topic? Professor Shiomi paused, putting a finger to her chin in thought. After a moment, she replied, Today's topic. Well, just make any dish you like, as long as it highlights the use of spices and impresses me, you pass. A wave of panic rippled through the classroom. What kind of vague theme is that? Any dish. How are we supposed to stand out? How do you even highlight spices? The students groaned in frustration, but Professor Shiomi remained unfazed, taking a seat at the podium. Megumi's face darkened, and she looked as though she was about to faint. This is it. I'm definitely going to fail out. She crouched down, whining softly. Sui tried to comfort her. Don't worry, we'll figure something out. Megumi's eyes suddenly lit up with a glimmer of hope. Wait, do you have experience working with spices? No, not really, Sui admitted. Her newfound hope shattered almost immediately. She sighed in defeat, standing up to introduce herself formally. Well, I'm Megumi Tadokuro. Please take care of me. Nice to meet you. I'm Sui Mizushima, he said with a polite nod. Sui. I don't think I've heard of you before, Megumi pondered aloud, tapping her lip in thought. I'm a transfer student, Sui explained. A transfer student? Megumi's expression stiffened. Are you the same transfer student who caused a scene during the freshman ceremony? The idea of being associated with the infamous new student filled Megumi with dread. Oh, no, that's not me, Sui reassured her, knowing she was referring to Soma. Megumi sighed in relief. That's good to hear. I'd rather not be involved with that transfer student. Just then, Sui received a notification for a new task. Daily missions. Mission objective. Achieve a grade of or higher in more than half of your courses. Task reward. Daily experience gift pack with a small chance to unlock recipes and rare ingredients. Daily missions. Sui thought aloud. It seemed he had no choice but to aim for top marks in each class. Alright, let's get started, Sui said, grinning confidently. Right, Megumi agreed, her spirits lifted by Sui's enthusiasm. Clenching her small fists, she nodded firmly. To make a dish that showcased the spices, Sui decided on spiced beef. We'll need beef from the lean elbow cut, Sui instructed. Got it. Megumi replied eagerly. Make sure to cut the beef along the grain, poke a few small holes, and rub salt into it. No problem, Sui-san. Has the beef been marinated? Yes, it's ready. With that, the two set to work, focusing on their dish. From across the room, students began whispering as they noticed Sui and Megumi. Isn't that Megumi Tadokuro? No matter how hard she tries, she's bound to drop out eventually. Yeah, and the guy she's with is way too good looking. Is he a transfer student too? If he's anything like that troublemaker from the ceremony, then he's probably a lost cause. Despite the murmurs of disdain, Sui and Megumi continued preparing their dish. After an hour and a half, the students began presenting their dishes one by one. This is rosemary grilled lamb chops, a student said, presenting their dish to Professor Shiomi. She picked up a knife and fork, cutting off a piece to taste. You used fresh rosemary leaves, right? She asked. Rosemary has a pine-like aroma that's excellent for masking gamey flavors. Yes, that's right. The student replied excitedly. But Professor Shiomi wasn't finished. However, using fresh rosemary for prolonged cooking can actually overpower the dish. Dried rosemary or rosemary powder would have been a better choice. Didn't you know that? 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 22. The First Day and Arena Nagikiri, who fled in the wilderness. But isn't the detailed use of rosemary part of the second-year curriculum? The students stammered, trying to defend themselves. Is that so? Professor Jun Shiomi asked with a blank expression. Why yes, the student confirmed hastily. But that seems pretty basic, doesn't it? As a student at Tatsuki Academy, shouldn't you already know the fundamental characteristics of various spices? Waiting until the second year to learn them seems a little late, don't you think? Shiomi replied, after giving it some thought. Oh my god, isn't that a bit too harsh? A student whispered. Harsh? It's downright unreasonable. Another student muttered. Seeing this, the other students were visibly rattled. Soon after, a few more were handed E grades. It's over. We're doomed. If this keeps up, I'm going to be expelled. The classroom was filled with despair and murmurs of concern. On the other side of the room, Sui opened the lid of the pot, releasing a wave of rich, aromatic steam. He carefully fished out the reddish-brown pieces of beef and plated them. Wow, what an incredible smell, Megumi exclaimed in awe. I didn't expect you to be this skilled, Sui-san. No, it's a dish we made together, Sui corrected her, slicing the spiced beef into thin, neat pieces. Megumi was deeply moved. While she had contributed by helping with smaller tasks, it was clear that Sui had done most of the detailed work. Once the beef cooled slightly, Sui gestured toward it. Go ahead and give it a try. He had already tasted it himself. While there were still a few imperfections, it was far from bad. Of course, if someone like Arena tasted it, she might mock him, but that was only because of her incredibly refined palate. Still, Sui believed that the spices had been handled well enough to pass. With that, he presented the spiced beef to Professor Shiomi. Ha! Look at them, some of the nearby students sneered. The transfer student and the second-to-last student are serving their dish now. It's bound to get an E, another student scoffed. Shiomi-jun glanced at the plate of spiced beef, her curiosity piqued. As she inhaled deeply, her eyes widened slightly, what an incredible aroma. Intrigued, she picked up her chopsticks and took a piece of the beef. The moment it touched her tongue, the soft, tender meat wrapped around her palate, and a symphony of complex flavors burst in her mouth. Spices like fennel, Sichuan peppercorns, cinnamon, and cloves came together in perfect harmony, each one distinct yet complementary. It's so intense, yet so balanced. It's like a symphony of flavors. Shiomi exclaimed, covering her face with a look of pure delight. It's absolutely delicious. What? Professor Shiomi. Did she just say that? No way. Did the transfer student and the girl at the bottom of the rankings make something that good? The students who had been expecting to laugh at Sui and Megumi stood frozen, their jaws dropping in disbelief. Shiomi-jun regained her composure and explained, normally, the rule is to highlight just one spice, but you've used 5 here, and each one stands out while still working in harmony with the others. She paused, smiling. Congratulations, you've passed. Unfortunately, I don't have the authority to give you higher than A, but you've done an excellent job. Thank you, Professor Shiomi, Sui said calmly. They actually got an A. Are you serious? This has to be a mistake. As the nearby students watched in shock, Sui and Megumi returned to their workstation. Megumi, still in disbelief, could hardly process what had just happened. They had passed the challenge, and not just that, they earned an A. After a while, Megumi finally snapped out of her daze. Her face flushed slightly as she smiled with relief. Thank goodness, I won't have to drop out. My mom will be so happy when she hears about this. Thank you, Sui-kun. As she spoke, she bowed deeply toward him. You don't need to thank me, Sui replied with a warm smile. Like I said before, you played a big part in making this dish too. Right. Megumi's face reddened even more. It was the first time someone had truly acknowledged her contribution, and her heart swelled with gratitude. From now on, just call me by my name, she added shyly. All right, Megumi, Sui agreed, smiling. He then gestured to the remaining beef on the plate. By the way, let's finish up this beef. It'd be a shame to let it go to waste. Okay, Megumi nodded eagerly. Truthfully, she had been wanting to try it for a while, but had felt too embarrassed to ask. She picked up a piece with her chopsticks and placed it in her mouth. As soon as she bit into the tender beef, a wave of rich aromas and flavors burst forth, and the next moment, a symphony of deliciousness danced on her tongue. Wow, what an amazing feeling, Megumi murmured, closing her eyes in delight. She covered her flushed cheeks with her hands, her expression full of bliss. Sui-kun, you're incredible. She exclaimed, her face filled with admiration. Hee hee, it's nothing special, Sui responded, a little embarrassed by her praise. If Irina were here, she'd probably be quick to criticize every flaw in his cooking with her usual disdain, he thought with a wry smile. In fact, he found himself missing her sharp remarks a little. The day flew by quickly. Thanks to his efforts, Sui managed to score an A in all of his classes that day. Hey, did you hear? That new transfer student got straight A's in all his courses today. A student whispered in the hallway. What? That's impressive. Was it the guy who made a scene at the freshman ceremony? Another student asked. No, it's someone else. I think his name is Sui. Irina had just walked out of the classroom when she overheard the conversation in the hallway. As soon as she heard Sui's name, she clenched her teeth, remembering the incident from that morning. Just as she was grinding her teeth in frustration, a familiar voice called out from behind her. Hey, isn't that Irina? Let's head back together. Sui called out, waving cheerfully. Irina froze. Her body stiffened, and when she turned around, she saw Sui waving enthusiastically in her direction. I told you not to talk to me at school. She hissed, practically jumping like a startled kitten. Students nearby glanced over, surprised at the commotion. Panicked, Irina quickly covered her face with her hands and shouted, I don't know you. Before rushing off, embarrassed. Sui stood there, watching her leave with a slightly dejected look. Next chapter. Enjoy this.